Hello everyone. A very warm welcome to the Lyric Theatre and the Our Place in Space Festival. I'm Cathy Clugston and our theme today is Our Place. What does it mean? How do we define it? And how does it affect our creativity? And joining us today are two people who left their native land to pursue their creative dreams, and they've been rather good at it. Please welcome Oliver Jeffers and Katrina Balfe. They don't really need any introduction, but I will do the formal thing just to start us off. Let's start with Oliver. Oliver's an artist and writer. His beautiful best-selling picture books have won numerous awards and been translated into over 40 languages. Along with Professor Stephen Smart and the Nerve Centre, Oliver created Our Place in Space, a 3D scale model of the solar system, which you can walk along, all 10 kilometres of it, on Divis Mountain. You can do that until the 10th of July. And of course, the accompanying series of talks and events. What was the thinking behind the festival, Oliver?
I suppose it comes from numerous things at once. One of the early indicators, or the seeds for me, was reading a book called A Brief History of Almost Everything by Bill Bryson, and it's basically what we know about our world and how we figured it out. Like, somebody worked out how heavy the Earth is. I was like, how do you do that? But one of them was saying that every map that we know of the solar system is wildly wrong. Because, you know, the ones that you have in school classrooms where Saturn is practically casting a shadow on Jupiter is so inaccurate that it's laughable. He says you cannot make a scale model of the solar system because, say, for example, the moon is the size of the dot and the I in this word, then Pluto would be about 10 kilometres away.
Yeah.
And you just can't, that's not practical for a map. And I just thought, could this be possible if it were done as a model? And then I sort of sat with that for a while. But when the opportunity came up to work with the wonderful people that we have here, it was like, well, how do we use that as a framing device to talk about something else? And that something else was, I suppose, we in Northern Ireland have experience with being divided and the us-them mentality, but there's very little of this globe that we're on that is actually habitable to human life, and it's the only place in the known cosmos where there is any life at all. And yet we're duffing each other up over borders and religions and things like that. And I was like, is this the best use of our time? Okay, well, we'll get a bit more into that. I'll introduce Katrina to you, actor, producer. Katrina spent 10 years as one of the world's most in-demand fashion models before moving to LA to train as an actor, something she'd longed to do since childhood. Katrina, I read your dad said in a recent newspaper article that you used to do a great Margaret Thatcher impression as a child.
Oh, shit. Yeah, I did. I mean, it was the time. She was... but I don't know that I'm going to replicate it.
Okay, fair enough. Fair enough. Well, Katrina's big break came in 2013 when she was cast as the time-travelling nurse Claire Randall in Outlander, a role for which she has received many, many awards, including an Irish Film and Television Award, 2 People's Choice Awards and 3 Saturn Awards. And the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences has just invited Katrina to become a member, perhaps as atonement for overlooking her absolutely stunning turn as Ma in Kenneth Branagh's film Belfast. Katrina, you're back in Belfast.
I am.
Everyone in Belfast has seen Belfast, I think, pretty much. What's the response been like?
Oh, I mean, it's been amazing. I think, you know, for all of us in the film, the most nervous all of us have been, and then I think the best night we've all had during all of that promotion was the night that we showed it here. You know, it's such a love letter to the city. It's obviously Ken looking back and remembering his childhood and remembering how special this city is to him and what it sort of, how it moulded him, I guess. And we all have that. We all have those places that kind of form us. But Belfast is a unique city, and it's just great. You know, I have my own connection to Belfast, and it was great to be part of something that brought me back here and kind of reintroduced me to the city.
And just in terms of being a member of the Academy, what does that actually involve?
I think I just watch a lot of films and vote. It sounds a lot fancier than maybe it is, but no, it's great. It's such an honour. I know Mr. Dornan was here yesterday. I don't know if anybody here was watching or talking to him, but you know, we've all, I think it's being part of a film like this that has resonated with people, and you know, it's brought us into another kind of part of our industry, and you kind of feel part of something that, you know, it's your peerage, it's people who sort of you respect, and you're part of this group now. So I don't know, it's very nice.
I think that you're hitting something interesting there, which is that it's a love letter to the city. And I've talked to people who didn't like the film, and they didn't like it because it didn't represent their memories of Belfast. And they were looking at it as an accurate historical document of what the city is. And it wasn't that. It could have been any city. It was a love letter about what Kenneth, I think the themes in his work, which is about community, love, hope, and really Belfast was the backdrop for that in some ways.
Yeah, I mean, we had somebody came to visit my parents after they'd seen it, and they were like, "Well, I didn't like the film. You know, I was there. I reported on Belfast. It's not at all what it was like." But she was great.
You were great. I thought you.
Oh no, but I mean, I think they felt they had to give that caveat. But it is, you know, I think everything. This is one thing that, you know, we were talking about, how art, it's a way of communicating with people, and for Ken, this is a way for him to sort of talk about and communicate with people about a place that formed him, and a place that, you know, now he's 60, looking back, and he's trying to, you know, put all of these pieces of him together. I mean, Ken is one of the most interesting and the most wonderful people you'll ever meet, but he's had a very kind of broken up life. You know, he had his early childhood in Belfast, then he had this, you know, the rest of it in Reading, and then he became, you know, hugely famous very young and all of this, and he was lauded and sort of taken on as this very posh English person, and I think he was trying to sort of put all of these pieces back together and look back on his life, and I think it's such a beautiful love letter to a city that...
My father-in-law said, you know, it was highly inaccurate. I was like, what do you mean? And he goes, there was nobody smoking in it.
Well, I think the laws have changed.
Yeah.
You know, we would have
that's not what it was like back then. But I think Kenneth in that film did something very succinctly that I've been trying a long time to do, and it's the theme. A big theme in my work, I think, is best summed up by Kurt Vonnegut in that book, where he says, "There's only one rule that I know of, babies. God damn it, you've got to be kind."
Very true. Now, so that film for Kenneth Branagh was a look back, as you say, to the place that formed him, the place he thinks of as home, and you know he does so much for the city. Where is home for you? It's a deceptively simple question, Oliver.
I probably shouldn't advertise this, but I have 4 passports.
Okay.
And
please elaborate.
Pretty sure that's not quite.
It might not
allowed.
be, and I've been trying to figure out for a long time: is the passport attached to the person, or is the person attached to the passport? Like, would anybody else find out? But it got confusing living in New York and sort of trying to explain. Oh, you're from Ireland. It was like, well, right, okay. Do you know that Ireland's divided in 2? It's like, is it? And going through this whole thing, I ended up reverting. I give one of 2 answers, and one is to go micro, and one is to go macro. And the macro answer is that I live in Belfast and Brooklyn. I just go back to the city-state. But the macro one is that I say I'm a citizen of, nay, a patriot of planet Earth.
Well, that's been a very big theme in your work, of course, this idea of space and our place in it. Right the way back to your sort of breakthrough book, to your most recent. Where did that obsession with space come from?
I think, honestly, from going to a summer camp in upstate New York when I was a kid, because you're way up in the Adirondacks, no light pollution, and we used to do this thing where you would lie on the grass at night, and you let your eye catch a star, and when you sort of let the light adjust, you'll see another star that's right nearby, that's tiny, and then you let your eye adjust to that, and then you can see another one. It was like, just sort of this idea of the infinite was not terrifying to me, but it was actually sort of liberating in some ways. It was, you know, wow, nothing matters. So if nothing matters, what's the point in worrying? you know, that kind of a thing. And so I've been interested in exploring the unknown.
So Belfast and Brooklyn is the shorthand for Oliver.
I have a hat with B on it. The answer changes. What's that for? Depending on where.
Yeah, depending where you are. You've had a sort of multi-city existence in your life and career so far, but you were born in Ireland, in Dublin, but didn't grow up there.
No. Yeah, I have a very, I don't know, it's a slightly complicated or complex relationship with this idea of home. I mean, obviously Monaghan is, but we were talking earlier about the idea of blow-ins. My family were very much blow-ins in Monaghan, and especially in my earlier youth, we were reminded of that quite frequently. You know, my dad was he's retired now, but he was a Garda sergeant in an area where that wasn't necessarily the most popular job to have. And I remember from a very, very young age always knowing that I would leave. And that, you know, I think from the age of like 7 or 8, it was like, I'm getting out of here. This is not going to be where I'm going to stay. And I think that was also something that kind of very much tied into what I wanted to become, you know, and being an actor and all those things. It was very much like, I'm going to get out of this place and I'm not going to come back. But of course, you always, it's a strange thing, because eventually you do start to look back and you do start to realise how much of that, you know, I've been out of Ireland now longer than I've lived in it. But I am, to my core, Irish. You can't change that. You know, that's very much a fabric of who you are. But the country has changed so much. I mean, I left in 1999. The country has changed insanely. Like, I don't even recognise it. I sort of feel like a tourist when I come back in some ways. But yet, I am still Irish. So it's a complex thing. But for me, home now is my family. I mean, I'm a little bit of a gypsy, I guess. You know, I've lived in many cities, and, you know, I think possibly where we met in New York felt the most like a home that I had, but that was an 8-year period.
Can I guess, was that because of the people that you found there?
I think so. Yeah, I think, you know, I do think for some people, you know, you create a family around you or wherever you are. I mean, you always do that in some ways, but, you know, I definitely think New York was, my 20s was very formative years. We just had a really great group of people as well, and it was a really amazing time in our lives, and I think a time in New York as well. It was a very kind of explosive and very creative time there.
Anything was possible.
It kind of was. And maybe that's an age thing.
Well, Oliver, you grew up in Belfast. You spent your childhood in North Belfast and went to university here. So when did you go to New York, and what took you there?
Well, I went to upstate New York when I was a kid a couple of times. And at that point, I was like, I remember when we were very little, we would go to Edinburgh for our summer holidays. And I remember my dad talking about, and I was like, where's that? And he goes, oh, it's another country. And I was like, there's more than 2 countries? And so when I went to America, it was like this, my mind just sort of exploded. And I remember it was 1990 and meeting this other kid, he was like, you're from Ireland. And back then, honestly, it was just easier to say, I didn't even understand myself. I was like, yeah. And they're like, do they have electricity there? There's like this ignorance about it. But what was the question again?
Yeah, no, I just wondered how you'd ended up in New York, and then how did you end up?
Oh, right, yeah. So I would go an awful lot, and then there was one summer that was really bad here, and I just thought, it's, you know, we lived in an area where there was you know, flashpoints nearby. And it wasn't a lot of fun that summer, and I was like, I don't want to be here next summer. And so I wrote to the camp and said, can I get a job? And I went back. And then made a lot of friends, and so when I was 20, I tagged on an extra week and went to New York City. And my friend Mac, who I stayed with at that point, who I also know from that camp, and he's here at the minute doing the baseball thing at City Hall. I spent a week in New York with him, and I was like, I am moving here. And it took me 6 years to figure out how, and I dragged my wife kicking and screaming. Well, she wasn't my wife then. And it felt like home for me, because there was like a positivity, like a palpable energy where, you know, people weren't just talking about doing something, they were doing it. and I felt supported and not judged and free in a lot of ways.
You both sort of alluded to finding your tribe there in New York, and it's sort of obvious, it's just as you're talking, that you do know each other, you are friends. Tell us how you met and how that happened, Katrina.
Well, we met, it sounds very bougie. we met at, now I'm forgetting the name of the restaurant.
Nobu.
Nobu, yeah.
Very fancy.
But
very
I have to
posh.
preface this, none of us, I think, at the time could really afford to be there.
No, the only reason we went is we knew the chef.
One of our friends, or one of your friends, PJ, was a chef there. And I was supposed to go with my friend Donal, who's really the connector here. And he flaked, and he was like, just go anyway. And so I was like, oh my God, I'm going to go and meet.
But it was Suzanne and I and another couple, so it was like you were going to meet 4 perfect strangers.
Absolute strangers. And I was like, really? Am I going to do this? Like, do I want a dinner at Nobu this badly? And apparently I did. But
I think we ended up in Koreatown doing karaoke and drinking soju at 3 in the morning.
I think we did. I think we did. But I think that's the beauty of when you're away, and sometimes, these kind of random connections that you make.
You know almost immediately when you're going to have a connection with somebody, and it's energy, and you're like, oh yeah, I like what you're about. I like your motivation and where you're going. And I've heard there's a way of judging people called the Picasso test. Have you heard this?
No.
So the Picasso test is, when you leave somebody's company, do you feel energized or drained?
Oh wow.
And apparently Picasso used to drain people. And it's a really interesting way to think about someone and the relationships that you have in your life, and with Katrina, with both Suzanne and I and Aaron and Esther, it was just like immediate, like, yes, this is invigorating, and just the way you were thinking and what you were talking about, it was like, and we just became tight friends after that.
Did you find then, living in the States, that you had to do a lot of explaining about Ireland and who you were? How did that go?
I mean, I remember very often, you would get into taxis and you'd try and explain Ireland and stuff, and quite often you'd get, oh, the war. And you're like, huh? They'd be like, there's a war there. And you're like, oh, right. Yeah, no, but sort of, oh, how do you explain this? Or you'd have to explain that it is an island. Quite often people wouldn't know where it is at all. But then also, I think one of the things, I lived in France for a couple of years before I moved to New York, and you would get into a taxi or whatever, and my butchering French or whatever, and they would kind of say, oh, you English or American? And you'd be like, no, I'm Irish. And all of a sudden their demeanor would change.
Completely changed.
They'd be like,
I can speak perfect English, yeah.
Yeah. And I think quite often that's the beauty of being Irish abroad.
We've never invaded anywhere.
We've never invaded anywhere. People generally know us from, having good fun. Yeah. And that's kind of a beautiful thing to be able to take around the world with you. I
actually remember being in a restaurant in Paris the same way and saying, are you English? I said, no, I'm Irish. And they actually took away, oh, you won't be drinking this. They took away the wine and brought a better wine.
Yeah. So we're diplomats of the world. But I was flicking back through old sketchbooks, and I realised that every couple of dozen pages or so, there would be a little drawing of the British Isles with the lines through it. And I kind of realised how many times I've had to draw that to explain to people that, no, there's a separate part of Ireland, and what the difference between Great Britain and the United Kingdom and the British Isles. And, these two are geographical terms, but this one's a political term. And I just realised that nobody really knew or really cared. And what really got me was that there was English expatriates over there who didn't know or care. And I was like, wow.
But I feel like I do this explanation of, like, people ask where Monaghan is, even some Irish people. And you do, well, Northern Ireland sort of looks like an upside down heart, and we're in the apex, and that's and so many English people are like, huh, what?
I never thought about that.
It sort of does,
yeah,
though.
It does.
And in terms of your work and the sort of the creative energy that you have, is being, are you an Irish artist, an Irish writer? Is that important, Oliver, to you?
No, I honestly tried to. So I remember being young, and the Northern Ireland were playing the Republic of Ireland in a World Cup qualifier, and I was like, well, we support Northern Ireland, and being raised Catholic, my family and friends were like, no. We support the Republic. I was like, this is really confusing. And then I read a quote by Samuel Johnson, who was an American politician in the 1700s, who said that patriotism is the last refuge of the scoundrel. And I've been thinking a lot about that since, and we all need to come from somewhere. It's not enough to just say, oh, we're from Earth, because that's, you know, that's like the homogenization of everything. But it's like, what is it? Why do Protestant fans that I know when they come to Northern Ireland, why do they say that they're Irish? And it's, I think here's the difference. Nations are nationalism and nations, the boundaries are hard and sharp and uninviting, whereas culture in a lot of ways is about a celebration, which can sometimes get aggressive, but it's a celebration of food, music, tradition, art, and I think it's the stories that are more powerful than the geography.
Mm. In all the years that you've been away, are there things that you miss about Ireland, or things that you held on to and maybe brought with you?
I mean, of course, yeah. It's, you know, it's a funny thing. I think your relationship with where you come from changes so much as you grow and as you change. And it's hard to sort of, I mean, obviously there's the like little tiny things like my mum's brown bread and, you know, Tayto crisps and depending on where you are, which ones are better. The salt and vinegar ones will always be better down there, I'm sorry. But, you know, it's strange. You know, I think I struggle with this kind of thing of identity, and because for a very long time, you know, I've lived in many places, and I've lived out of Ireland longer than I lived in it. But I am Irish, but I have so little connection to sort of modern Ireland at this point. You know, the things that people who have lived in Ireland, like my sister who's lived here the last 20 years, you know, the experiences that they've gone through, the politics, the social changes, all of these things, you know, I haven't been part of that. For most of my 20s, I felt almost like an American because I lived there and I went through those kind of social changes and political changes, and you become very invested. And then I sort of left there, and I'm in Scotland, and I arrived right before they were having an independence vote, and I was like, oh my God, what's happening? And you know, you don't really feel a right to sort of have a say in there, but because you live there, it's like all of a sudden you have a vote on something, and it's a very, you know, it's a very strange position to be in, to sort of be in this constant role, and it's something, you know, and I now have a son, and I think about it a lot of like, at some point you need to have roots, and for him, you know.
Right, and this is interesting. You have a son, and he doesn't speak English yet.
No.
So he doesn't know any of the stories that are going to form his life, and this is part of the reason that this project came through. It came out of a book called Here We Are, where I realised that there's this human being who's a complete blank slate. And it's up to me to teach him everything. And he was born in July, and a couple of days later there was trouble here, and we were in New York, and I was looking at the news footage, and you know, it was 12-year-olds, 14-year-olds that were out burning the buses and rioting. And I was like,
it's kids.
What do they actually really? What do they think they're doing? What do they think the story is? They've been told that story, and it made me think of this Mandela quote that no children are born with hate in their heart; they must learn it. And if you can learn to hate, you can be taught to love. I think that's a more natural state to be in anyway. And I was like, we are story creatures. I've always thought that everybody is a collection of stories. The stories they're told, the stories they tell themselves, and the stories told about them. But the most powerful awakening for me as an artist is that you can change any one of those stories. You can change the story. You can tell a better one.
It's got to be the willingness, I suppose. That's the...
Or just an ability to be able to snap out of the momentum of it all.
Yeah.
I think also, you know, that is traditionally where our industry, as sometimes people kind of say to us, you know, you're just an actor, you're just an artist, stay in your lane, you shouldn't be having an opinion in this. But actually, as storytellers, traditionally, you've been the keeper of that tradition which educates. You know, you're telling the story, you're kind of showing the way. Yeah. You know, I don't think, you know, I don't want to add a sort of importance or anything, you know, I think...
Well, no, I think you should. I honestly think you should. I think art is undervalued from education and even societal, you know. What did everybody do during lockdown to get them through? They were either watching movies, listening to music, or reading books. It's like, that's art.
Yeah.
All of those are art, and art has this very, very important role. Children know how to read an image before they can read a word. But yet art is just sort of some throwaway thing in education, and I think we have to change that. We have to recognize just how important art and stories are in the formation of us as people.
Yeah.
You talk in your work, Oliver, about the overview effect. I wonder, could you explain that to us?
Okay, so the overview effect is there have only been 12 human beings who have ever left Earth far enough to actually see it in its entirety. So even though the ones who go up to the International Space Station, there's about 500 of those, if I don't know, if the Earth is the size of this table, they're only about that far away. But the moon is 250,000 miles away, and you really see Earth as this single object. And I think it's when you suddenly understand that it's one giant system. It's one giant single system, and all of this petty parochial bullshit that honestly takes up most people's lives is wildly irrelevant. And it's the connectedness to it all. And you know, don't forget, astronauts are engineers and scientists. They're not hired or employed for their ability to be emotional. In fact, that's actually
it's a disadvantage.
That's a disadvantage.
Yeah.
But yet even these astronauts will go up to space and just have this profound shift in their thinking. And there's a great quote by Frank White, who was one of those astronauts, and he said, you know, it just makes you want to grab politicians by the scruff of the neck and drag them 250,000 miles away and say, look at that, you son of a bitch.
Yeah. Puts things in perspective. That's sort of talking of time and space. It makes me think of Claire in Outlander, and obviously she is, you know, in different dimensions, has different existences. Has that been interesting to explore that idea of identity with somebody in a completely different time?
Yeah, well, I think what I've learnt throughout this show, which has been really interesting, and I think it's something that we tend to. It's a misnomer, right? We tend to think of people in a different time as different to us. That people back then felt this way or thought this way. And maybe I'm wrong, but I firmly believe that the same things are important throughout any time, throughout any place.
We have not evolved in 10,000 years.
No, and this idea that, and I think it's a great example of how you can be more empathetic and understand people throughout the world. It doesn't matter if your society is not as evolved, or if you're not as wealthy, or whatever it is. The same core things are always true. You know, the things that you love, the things that you fear, the things that you want, desire, all of these things, they don't change just because, you know, it was 100 years ago, 200 years ago. Of course, there's certain differences with, you know, technology and evolution and all these things in that way. But, you know,
we've just sped up and
we've just sped up.
We've got a shorter attention span. We forget. It's like somebody explained the history of civilization is re-remembering the same lessons over and over again,
or forgetting. Like that's.
Well, you got to forget to re-remember.
Well, yes, this is true. But that's the thing that is so frustrating, I think, when you realise that. It's almost cyclical. You can almost look at history and go, oh, there was a huge world war there. 100 years later, we're sort of building up to another one because we've forgotten all the lessons that were learned from the last one.
Who was it said that history doesn't repeat itself, but it rhymes?
Yeah.
And that's true. And
I don't know who said
so
that. They were wise.
They were wise. I was interviewing this Hindu monk once for this art project, and he said something really, really interesting. He was that all modern science is slowly catching up to Eastern philosophies of thousands of years ago. And the big difference is that modern science requires proof. Eastern philosophies were, they were based on intuition, feeling. And you cannot prove a feeling. But we're getting back to what we understood and felt and prioritized a long, long time ago. And a lot of it is about community and safety.
Yeah. I hope you're right. And I suppose the lockdown again has sort of brought that more sharply into focus for many of us. I know that you're based sort of back at home at the moment here in Northern Ireland, but it wasn't quite your intention, was it, to come home at this time?
If you look back on all the plans that make for yourself over a year, almost nothing ever goes according to plan. But yeah, we were travelling. Had taken a year off with our two kids. Who were 1 and 4 when we left. Don't know what we were thinking.
By the way, now that I've had a kid, I was thinking about this the other day, and I was like, I can't believe they did that.
So in a way, COVID was a blessing. It was like, oh, thank God. But we ended up coming back here just before the big lockdown. And full disclosure, I used to say until a couple of years ago, I was like, I'm not moving back to Northern Ireland over my dead body. It's like I'm sick of the small-mindedness, the parochial thinking, the us-themness, the tallest poppy syndrome, all of that. And it was only when we came back, and my wife definitely wanted to move back because she had much closer friends from childhood, and her family was here as well as mine. Not that I don't love my family, but they would come over to New York a lot. And when we got here, I realised I really like this place. I really like the people here. Geographically, it's beautiful, and it feels like there's something I can do. There's something I can offer. And my wife recognised that she actually missed New York. So,
you
can't, well, but not enough to move back. But just like we're going to keep a foot there. And what do you mean you can't get sushi at 11 o'clock on Tuesday?
Yeah, it's funny. And but to come back, not just as someone who's been away for a while, which maybe many of us here have, but to come back as sort of an internationally renowned figure is quite different. How do people react to that?
Well, so my existence is very different from yours. People recognise you. They don't necessarily recognise me.
Sometimes.
Yeah, but
I think people probably
they're starting to now. I think it was from doing the lockdown readings, which I had no idea were going to land so well with people. And somebody explained that a bunch of different other picture book people and artists did that, but they were all in studios and very well polished. Whereas I was sitting in my bed with a laptop and a washing basket and a pencil to try and move my phone at the same time as the computer. It was so lo-fi, but it was real and charming. And anyway, people started to recognise me. But I don't know. I've been sort of going through a bit of a shift recently where I don't think of myself as a bookmaker or an artist, but something other than that. And we were just talking back there. When was the last time we saw each other? And it was in Glasgow when I was there for COP26 doing that sculpture. And in the blue zone, which was the one where the world leaders were going to, there was the green zone, which is the public-facing one. The blue zone, to get my badge, they didn't have a box for artist, so they put me down as an observer and a translator. Oh. And I was like, actually, that's surprising.
That's not bad.
That's surprisingly apt, yeah.
Yeah, funny. And so, Katrina, for you, coming back is a big event. If you come back to Monaghan, it's kind of a big deal.
Well, yeah. I mean, I don't know. I mean, my parents are now on TV more than I am.
They're loving
it. Those wily little... yeah, it's a very strange thing. I mean, we talked earlier about the idea of blow in and not fitting in, and then you go away, and all of a sudden now you're back and you're sort of claimed or owned, and it's a nice feeling, I have to say. Like, it is, any acceptance is very nice,
actually, for the first few years that I lived in New York and I come back, people are like, oh, you left, you've no right to have an opinion. And that did start to change, because it was obvious that I'm always going to keep a connection here, and this always got me. People, art college students would recognise me, especially when in one of the pubs around there, and they would come up and say, isn't it brilliant you've done so well, even though you're from here? And I was like, no, you don't understand. What is the population of Belfast? What, like 500,000 people, slightly less?
600,000? Oh, I think I know that.
I could probably name you 10 places in England that have the same population you've never heard of. You say Belfast anywhere, people know it. We punch above our weight. There's some grit in the water, and it really started to bother me. I was like, no. It should be, isn't it great you've done well because you're from here? There is something here. We have something, and I think it's this shared experience of confusion, which we haven't fully allowed to destroy ourselves, in the sense of humour and the art and the generosity and all of that. Like so many phenomenal things have come from Northern Ireland. Like the first radio waves were sent, the first air conditioning, which also involved the invention of asbestos.
Hold on a minute. Air conditioning.
Yeah,
Belfast.
the Royal
there
Hospital.
Is no heat.
But it was a hospital to keep the air clean.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, you know what? I'm glad I learned that.
Yeah, we learned something today.
When I talk to people about Belfast, I was like, well, you know, it's famous for a few reasons. As I say, the Titanic was made here, which sank. Then there was the DeLorean car company, which tanked. And then there was George Best, who drank. And the Troubles. But then I was like, no, there's got to be other good things. And it turns out there is. Yeah. There really is.
So Game of Thrones, come on.
Yeah, Line of Duty.
Although it did spoil my favourite beach that nobody knew about before. Now you go and there's loads of people.
Yeah, loads of signs. I wanted to talk to you briefly about accent, because I am fascinated with voices, being a radio person, and accent. And our voice is so much a part of how we present ourselves. Both of you still have kept your accents. I note there's a little, like a tiniest little twang of New York in yours, Oliver. But you know, you can tell it's a Belfast accent. It's the tiniest.
Well, I would say that I actually we were at the 10 by 9 story event last night, and Chelsea Clinton was there. She was giving a story, and she was like, "You kept your accent, or do I hear American in there?" And I turned around and tapped my friend Joe Lindsay on the shoulder. I was like, did I keep my accent? And he goes, no, and then turned back to his pint. But then he followed up. I was like, no, you've kept the accent, but the inclination has changed. And it was, I suppose it was born out of a necessity to be understood. Yeah. When I first was living in New York, you'd phone AT&T, and it was like, press or say two.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Ordering a tuna sandwich.
Yeah.
Tuna.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, what? Yeah. Tuna.
Yeah. Or, you know, what do you...
Tuna?
In New York, what do you call the water that gathers on the plants at dawn?
Dew.
Dew, yeah.
Yeah. Because when I first started at Radio 4, more or less the first week, we had a programme on, which is spelt OWLPROWL, a nature programme. Oil prowl. There were quite a few complaints. Oil prowl. But you know, you sound Irish. Absolutely. Has it been something you've clung on to, or is that just how it goes?
My husband's somewhere here, and he's probably laughing at this. No, I think I sounded very mid-Atlantic for a long time. I think I'm going to really embarrass him now. He used to say, what was he used to say? It was like a strong personality keeps their accent.
I disagree
or something like that. And no, I disagree with it.
I disagree with that, because I think it's an observant person who is interested in being...
ear.
Yeah.
And
is interested in patterns.
Empathetic to want to sound like people. And it's sort of a mirroring thing. And I think a lot of people do it. But, you know, I was in the US for 13 years, and I definitely think I had a much more American accent. And then obviously moving to Scotland, I haven't gotten a Scottish accent. But it's funny, Sam, who I work with, in the last 3 months, he's like, what's going on with you? You're really Irish all of a sudden. And I was like, I don't know what it is. Like, I've somehow, and I don't know if it's my son or, well, my mum bought him these amazing books, which have a little button, and they are Irish Gaelic folk songs for children, one of which is about a man who's sitting under a tree talking about how he sold his cow for money and has just drank it all. And, you know, only in Ireland is there a children's book about, you know, alcoholism and what business is it of yours if this is what I wanted to do with my life, which is one of the translations. But I don't know if it's that. I don't know if it's...
Can you do accents? Are you good at doing other accents? Obviously, Claire is English.
Well, Claire, yeah.
I mean, most of my work I've done a different accent, so I would hope so. I don't know.
But what's interesting is that you have, you've been so well known in the States for Outlander. Obviously, we're starting to get people get into it here, and we know it here now. But you haven't really worked in Ireland as an actor that much until Belfast.
We didn't film Belfast here. I know they did some filming here, but I wasn't part of that. Yeah. No, we filmed it down in... But I kept saying Surrey, but apparently it's the Berkshire-Surrey border. I've never actually worked as an actor in Ireland.
And is that something that's going to change?
I'm desperate to find something to do there. But I think it's like one of those things that it has to be special, right? It has to be the right thing. It has to be something that, and in the last almost 10 years now, I just haven't had a lot of time to do other things. So when I have done, I thought Belfast was going to film here. I was so excited because it was in between lockdowns. My family were in Ballycastle, I think it is, on a little beach holiday. I was like, oh, great, I'll see my family. My parents are just an hour down the road. But then we were in England, so...
Can I tangent here? Because we've talked about this, when we threw in you under the bus, that your future is not only just going to be in front of the camera, is it?
Yeah.
Well, hopefully not, no. There's some people here. I'm going to direct some little extra scenes this season.
Of Outlander?
Which is, yeah. Ah. But, yeah, that's kind of where I want to...
Because I know that you had spoken,
well.
you spoke to Kenneth Branagh, didn't you, when you were filming, about directing, and he gave you
Kenneth was
some
the
advice.
most encouraging. He's just such a champion of people. Like you'll see this, he works with people over and over again. He's just a real champion of anything you want to do. And, it's funny, I've been working on a script for a very long time, which hopefully might be the first thing I might direct as a feature. But
You're writing?
That I'm writing. But it's very much based at home, and that thing of like trying to understand in a very different way. It's not literal. It's it's about a much older woman, but I do think there is something. I think as an actor you get very limited to the kind of stories you can tell, and I think that that's something that I recognise as a woman in this industry, as an actor. You're cast based on how you look, your age, your height, very often, because a lot of other actors are not that tall and they don't want a taller actress.
They're tiny.
And so I think all of that, I'm just more interested, I think, also in a broader story. I want to be able to tell stories that are not about, not about whatever accent I can do, but not about me, not about a woman that I fit into that very narrow window of.
Rather than the things that you're not trying to do, have you noticed any themes that are coming up that are particularly interesting to you or that you want to explore?
I would say there's probably a through line with all of the things that I've done thus far, but I think that's also connected to what I show in terms of the things that I'm interested in exploring if I stepped away from just what I could do. I'm always interested in, and it very much ties in this, I'm interested in what forms us as people, how we keep that or how we change that. I think there's such a universal, we all come from a family. That family can either raise us high or dampen us down. And I think it's so interesting to try and discover how people either go against that positively and negatively, if it's been positive or negative, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
I'm interested in human dynamics. I am.
I think you're hitting on, I think, one of the key elements of my work, which is community.
Yeah.
I honestly think community is the root of where things are seeming so turbulent right now, where it's everybody's left to their own devices. Yeah, it's the time of self.
But this is the thing. Like I look at my parents, and my parents were kind of unusual in the fact that not unusual in the fact that they came from very big families, but they moved away from where the rest of the family kind of was. Because of my dad's job, he was stationed away. That's kind of part of being a police officer. You're not allowed to really serve in the community that you're from because it would be too close or whatever. And so I think that dislocation of them informed me as a child. Being a blow-in has informed me. Being sort of part of a community but not. And I grew up in a place where in my primary school you would have a child of every family in each class but they would have their parents, their grandparents, everybody they were from their deep generations. And I think that it's something that, I don't know, you having moved away or leaving a place and going back, or being from a place that's conflicted, I think that it's a very...
Reminds you of what's precious.
Yeah.
I was playing this game for the first few months of lockdown, and phoning friends and saying, I was like, okay, imagine somebody had told you a year ago, you're going to live on your own, isolated from everybody, name me the top 3 things that you'd miss. And then they would do that, and I was like, now what are the things you actually miss? And they were totally different. And it was, you know, like for me, it was, what would I miss if I had to live in this tiny apartment in Belfast? It's like, you know, the imaginary list involved things like, oh, the fancy restaurants or like the art parties or things like that. But what I actually missed was, you know, going for dinner with my dad.
Yeah.
And it was just so much more base than that. There's a brilliant book called Tribe by Sebastian Junger. It should be, what do you call that word?
On the curriculum?
On the curriculum or compulsory reading. And it talks about the importance of community and how we have been experiencing the slow breakdown of community from around the end of World War II. And that ultimately modernization breeds isolation.
Yeah.
Like, think about it, you're walking around your phone in a city, you're surrounded by more people than you've ever been, but...
Never been more alone,
yeah.
A lot of us, yeah.
Yeah.
So true. I'm going to open up the floor for questions in a few moments, so just be thinking about that in the back of your mind if you've got a chance to put your questions. So we've heard a little bit about your hopes and plans for the future. People will want to know when The Droughtlander is over. You're filming at the moment, aren't you?
Yeah, okay, I actually gladly don't know the answer to that, so I don't have to pretend and be like, oh no. We started filming beginning of April. We're almost finished with our 3rd block. This one is kind of a mega season, so we're going to be filming till next year. I have absolutely no idea when they're going to air it.
But they're coming, they're on their way.
We're working very hard. And, you know, it's been great. Last season we filmed during an absolute lockdown. I was pregnant. It was a very weird time. There was nobody on the roads. Scotland was in deep lockdown. And it just felt really joyous, I think, from the get-go. Now it's getting a bit hairy again, which is really weird. Like, we went from the very beginning in April of, we're an American show. We've had a lot of protocols in place. We all still wear masks. We're still getting tested all the time. We went from there's no COVID on set this week. There's no COVID. And last week there's 24 cases.
Okay.
It's really strange. I mean, people are going about their daily lives and it's not the same. So I don't know. It's a very strange time, but we're trying to make good TV in a very strange time.
I think we're in the middle of a global transition. I think COVID has been a giant catalyst for globally, collectively. I think why we have a supply chain issue is that a lot of people figured out that they don't want to do shit work for no money.
Yeah.
I mean, that's ultimately what it comes down to. But also, a lot of individual people have finally been dealing with the stuff that they've brushed under the carpet for years. My friend Dennis said something really interesting. I was flying in New York, supposed to have dinner with him, but he was at this school fundraiser and he was getting drunk with all their parents, and so I was like, I'm going to give that a miss. Saw him for breakfast the next day and said, how was it? And he said this: do you know the way in the before times you would meet somebody and you'd eventually get to know them and then eventually they'd reveal their cracks? I kind of feel like you meet a crack first and then you eventually get to know them. And I thought about that and I was like, yeah, that's accurate. And I actually think it's kind of healthy. Because people are willing to be vulnerable because it's, we were sort of shown how bad things could be.
Yeah, we're thirsty for the communication.
There's been such a schism, I think in everything. I mean, people have kind of figured out what's really important, what they want to do with their time. Their time is now important. I think that's I think that's the thing. People have figured out time is important more than anything else.
It's the only valuable thing you have, really.
Yeah,
other
time
than
and health. Yeah.
Yeah.
And Oliver, you've spoken a lot about how your children have informed your work. You've written beautiful books, sort of inspired by them, by the tiny people. How has being or will have been based here for a while? Do you think that's going to change how you work?
I've just finished a book that's going to print about the history of human conflict. So, for 4 years.
Tell us some more.
And it's based
so
on
it's like this size, yeah?
It is 40 pages long, and it's sort of inspired by watching my kids fight in the back of a car, and also a lot of the things that I've been learning from the Solar System project about the distances and trying to use metrics to make them, illustrate them. And I'm probably giving too much away here, but it's using the scale of the solar system, the gap between the planets, and how long it would take to drive there in a car at 35 miles an hour, which is the average speed people drive at. How long would it take to get to each of these planets, and what was happening back on Earth that long ago? And there was always a conflict.
Yeah. So when can we expect to see that? October. Excellent. Okay, well, thank you so much for the chat. I want to see what people would like to know. So if you can, have we got a mic or do we just holler? Yeah, let's see actually. Oh, there's somebody at the very, very back. I think, sorry, I can't see. Is that a hand up? No?
Nobody has any questions.
Nobody has any questions for these wonderful people.
I'll go. Just struck me when you were talking in Northern Ireland. I don't know if it's the same across the border, but there's this requirement that you be...
Oh, there's a microphone just coming, actually, so we could all hear you. Lovely, thank you.
In Northern Ireland, it seems there's this requirement that you be very humble and self-deprecating. And you two, you've gone and had success in other countries, and I just wondered, how do you grow beyond that? How do you, get the confidence when that's been your upbringing? And similarly, how do you hold on to that confidence and bigger mindset when you come back here? You feel yourself shrinking into the parameters that people here maybe expect you to fit into?
I'll take the first part, you take the second part. Really good question.
Yeah, great question.
I remember when I first moved to France first, then when I first moved to New York, the word I probably said the most was, I'm sorry. Because I'd be like, oh, I'm sorry for breathing, I'm sorry for being here, I'm sorry for standing in this queue, I'm sorry for asking a question. And actually that was the one great thing about being in America, because they are not sorry for anything. They should be maybe a little bit more sorry for a lot of things, but they're not. And it's look, there's something beautiful about humility, right? Humility is a good grace to have, or a good thing to have to a certain extent, except when it starts to tell you that you're not as worthy as anybody else to take up a piece of space. And I think that that's one thing you have to know. You have every right to be in any place, to say anything. Something I still struggle with. I don't think that I'll ever leave.
One
but
caveat to that, though, you do, but if you do, you have to be willing to face the consequences of that.
What do you mean?
Like,
yeah.
you can say something wildly offensive to somebody, and they have the right to be offended by that. Is the thing?
Oh, I never say anything offensive to anybody. I mean, what do you want to say with your space? I'm like talking about positivity here.
Oh, sorry.
No, but I just, yeah, I don't know. I guess you're talking about the confidence. In a way, I think if you're doing something you love, for me, that's always been the thing, that the love of something has been greater to me than my belief. So the love of it has been bigger to me than believing that I'm good at it, and that's followed. Do you know what I mean? I don't know what it means to come back.
But that feeling of being good, of not being good enough, which I think you're sort of slightly alluding to, that, we're not as good as other people. We don't have the same experience as other people. And when you're in the acting business, when you're constantly being told no, 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 maybe yes, oh no, how do you keep that self-belief?
Well, first of all, I just come from the fashion industry, which will absolutely kill you. You're just told no all the time and for no reason. And at least with acting, I went in with an actual piece of work that I'd worked on, that I'd invested in. And if they'd said no, sometimes it hurt more, but also I felt like there was some at least transaction. As a model, it was just like, no, you are shit. Go.
Yes.
You know?
One look at you. No.
Yeah. Which literally sometimes they did. They'd be like, no. And you'd be like, oh. I don't know. It's a hard thing.
Because also you don't want to come back, you know. You can't be the big I am here, can you?
No, it's...
People
but
will not
I think it has to do with a lack of results and more about process. I think that's always been the thing that saved me, has been the process. Do I love it? Am I enjoying learning these lines, even if I know I'm going to walk into a room and somebody's going to go, thank you? I'm enjoying doing the thing that I knew from I was this high that I always wanted to do. And any opportunity to get to do it, even if it's in a room with people who could not be less interested in me, that was an opportunity to still do something that I love. It's different as an artist. You can sit in your room and do this thing. I mean, you could sit and do monologues to yourself in a mirror. I have done it. It's not as exciting. As actors, we just need an audience.
You yourself for the canvas in acting, whereas I can hide behind the process in some ways. Because it's not about me as a person, it's about this thing that I make.
Yeah, but see, I look at yourself. That's really interesting that you said that, because I always think of like artists and musicians as people who it's a very pure form, like as in, well, it's you who does it. Yes, that's your thing. Yes. Whereas as an actor, whatever you need. Well, you need permission. You need you need the structure around you. You need the audience. You need, you know, is it a play or TV? Like, you need the whole thing.
This reminds me of a story of our friend Liz, who's a costume designer for film, and she had been rejected for a job, and we were at another friend who's an actor's opening or something, I can't remember, and Liz was feeling low about herself, and I was trying to give her a pep talk, and I was like, look, you know, don't forget, actors are just basically paint. And and it was like, you know, you're trying to make films. It's like you're the artist, and I don't necessarily feel that way, but I was trying to make her feel better. And at that, Ophelia walked past, and she was like this. I was like, shit.
Yeah, don't ever say that again.
No, but it is. But I think in the arts alone, it is weirdly, the more selfish you are, the more generous you are. Because if you lose yourself down a process, just about, well, like, let me back up. I think, to answer your question, I think whenever, you know, you're sort of worried about what other people think and everything, there's Robbie Burns, the Scottish poet, said something along the lines of, if you're worried what other people think about you, you'd be shocked at how little they do. And I think I boiled it down to two questions, and the more important one is, whose validation is it that I'm actually seeking? You know, who is it that I want to impress? And what is my motivation for making work? Is it because I want to look cool? Or is it because I want to interpret? Is it I want to make beautiful things? And it can often take you a long time to become at peace with your answer. But that idea of being selfish to be generous, alone in the arts, if you make a film or I think a book or a painting, thinking, I was like, I think that's what they want to see.
No, you'll never.
It's not. But you'll the greatest pieces of work I think have come from where somebody has just absolutely gone down the rabbit warren of themselves, been totally self-indulgent.
This is what I need to say, or this is what I.
Yeah.
Well,
you don't have an audience in mind. Yeah. You're lost in the work, and you're being selfish. But by being selfish, you're being generous because you allow other people to apply themselves and see your own feelings. And the French artist J.R. said, being an artist is about being willing to fail publicly.
That is a very, very important thing, like, especially as an actor. You have to, you know, people often ask, when you're doing a scene, especially in relation to Outlander, because it's such a beloved book series and there's so many beloved moments that are very important to fans, and they often ask, you know, do you have that in mind? And it's like, well, you can't, because if which goes to your point, if I'm thinking about anything else but how I feel in this moment, how my character feels in this moment, then I'm not in this moment, and then it will never resonate with anybody.
Yeah. I suppose to translate that into a job that somebody might do, or things that people might do that aren't artistic necessarily, it's that being authentic, I suppose, is what you're saying, being true to yourself, and let other people worry about themselves.
It takes an awful lot of time to figure out, well, what is my authentic self? And Daniel Lismore was here a couple of days ago, and he's often used that the Oscar Wilde quote, "Be yourself as everybody else is taken." I think there's a better one, and it's by Cher, who said, "All of us invent ourselves. Some of us just have more imagination than the others."
Interesting. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it's that idea of, like, if you don't have to be self-deprecating, you can dream bigger.
Yeah. But this self-deprecating thing, I will say, I think it's a very, very Irish thing, right? We really have this thing about we can't get too big for our britches. And there's such a fine line between humility and then, is it martyrdom? Is that the word I'm looking for? Like, at a certain point, it almost becomes a narcissism, because you're like, oh no, not me, and then you become, and it does become about you, because you're like, oh no.
So see the self-deprecating thing. It's with everything. If you go back to the actual root motivation, it's like, why are you being self-deprecating? Because you are not actually comfortable in your own skin, or because you're trying to make that person feel better. There's two very different things going on, and I think a lot of the Irishness is actually born out of the second one. Is like, I'm trying to make that person feel comfortable.
And that's a good thing sometimes.
Yes.
You're trying to make
it is a good thing, but there's other ways also of making that first person feel comfortable without putting yourself down.
Yeah.
But if you believe it, though, if you really believe what you're saying about putting yourself down, that's a different thing. Whereas if you just sort of being sarcastic or wildly exaggerative, it can be funny. I've always liked. There's a non-bullyish nature about Irish comedy. So, you go to a stand-up comedy club in New York, and there's New York comedians, they're making fun of everybody else, and then an Irish comic gets up and he makes fun of himself, and it's absolutely universally hilarious. And he's not attacking anybody else, or she's not attacking anybody else, and I've always liked that. There's a generosity in our humour, and it's one of the reasons why when you go to France and somebody figures out you're Irish, you get a bottle of wine, because we help other people feel good about themselves in a lot of ways.
Yeah, and that's something to be proud of. Who else would have a question? Yes, the lady here in the front. You pass the mic, thank you. Hi.
Hi. Sorry, I'm a bit nervous. So you talked about accents, but I think that language in general is important and part of the identity. So Katrina, I know that you also speak Irish, like Gaeilge. And I try to learn it too. And I was just wondering how important it is still for you now that you probably don't have a lot of chances to speak it. And if you could, would you want to include it in the life of your child? So would you, if you could teach him, would you want him to learn it, or is it?
It's already, my mother is already
she's on the case. On the case.
The songs are already in there. It's really interesting. I did not grow up in so there's certain parts of Ireland that are Gaeltachts, which are bilingual, Irish and English. But I used to go to the Gaeltachts every summer. So at one point in my life, I was fluent. I had my fáinne to prove it and everything. I've lost so much of it. It's really, really sad. But I guess my mum getting these books, and they're all of these like Irish.
Oh, the drunk tractor driver, what it was?
But they're all in Gaelic, and they remind me so much of. And maybe that's why my Irish accent in the last month or so has just exploded. But they remind me so much of being a child, and I remember them so much, and they're so evocative of memories, and all of a sudden I'm remembering a lot more Irish words and all of these things and phrases. It's in there somewhere.
Yeah. Another surprising thing about Katrina, we were at New Year's Eve in the west of Kerry at one point, and we were in a pub in a session, and somebody says, "Does anybody know how to play the tin whistle?" And Katrina's like, "I do," and played the tin whistle like a maestro. I was like,
And a bit of accordion too, I think.
I do play. Yeah, I play the accordion.
Not being self-deprecating.
I mean,
hope,
the
Katrina.
coolest instrument in the world, right? So cool. But yeah, I don't know. Yeah, it's interesting. It's a really sad thing that sometimes languages, you know, you don't just learn them once, right? It's not like you learn them once and they're there and they're with you for life. Like, I also used to be a kind of okay French speaker, and now my French is absolutely terrible. And it's this thing of like, you have to keep investing in it. And, you know, it's very hard to invest in a language when you don't live in the country and you're not surrounded by the other speakers. And
I can't even speak English.
Let's have another question then. Thank you.
I want to say 2 minutes. I want to say 2 minutes at the end for we're going to tell a story about how I found out that Katrina got the part in Outlander before she did.
We'll save that.
The real India story.
We'll save that little for the finale. Let's take a couple more questions if we have them. Yes, we just pass the mic back. Hi there.
Hi. I have a question actually for both of you, because I'm an editor and we often see art mirroring society and reality. And so if the two of you could travel 100 years into the future, how would you say or dream that our place in space right now is reflected in films and books? I know it's very hypothetical.
Just films and books?
Or art in general, also paintings, of course.
100 years in the future, God.
We'll have figured it all out by then.
Yeah. Well, hopefully we're not on another. We haven't sort of gotten through this tumultuous phase and like gone into a lovely phase of kind of, you know,
kindness and community.
Kindness and nations joining together to say we'll never have a war again and we'll never allow these things to happen again, and then we'll have had some new invention and then we'll have forgotten it all and we'll be back on the cusp. Hopefully it's not that. I don't know. I'm a very hopeful person.
Yeah, I think that's almost impossible to answer, because art is reactionary. You know, it's a commentary on our times, and we have no idea what way this is going to go. We were joking about Game of Thrones earlier, where one of the reasons that somebody said this to me once is that anything you think was going to happen in Game of Thrones didn't. And that's kind of like life. We've no idea where this is going to go, and another story might come in that will totally drown out all the other stories. But art is a reaction.
Maybe we'll get invaded by aliens and it will make all...
We'll unite.
There'll be a united Earth, and then we'll find out they just came to give us like some amazing resource anyway. So.
Oh, they came to give us something? That's very nice.
I mean, maybe.
That's quite a tricky one. Thank you, though. Interesting thought. Would anyone else like to ask a question?
All right.
No one else?
We're done.
Okay,
we were clearly so thorough.
Exactly, you covered everything. We did, I want to hear about the Outlander story, but I also want to hear about the passport story.
Same one.
Oh, it's the same
story. Okay, let's have it.
All right, we'll try and do this very briefly. Okay, so.
Okay, my passport was in the San Francisco Indian offshoot embassy, because I was going to go to India with Oliver and his beautiful wife Suzanne and our friend Donal, because you were doing a book tour.
Yes.
And you were also going to have a beautiful marriage ceremony, or was that
no? Donal made that up on the spot because he felt resentful that he couldn't.
We were all going to go to India and have an amazing time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And
you were in LA, we were in New York. We got our visas. We went. Katrina sent her, and India had just outsourced their visa application process, so they lost Katrina's passport.
No, they didn't lose it. It was processing.
Oh.
For a very, very, very long time. While it was processing, I was waiting. I was like, I'll book my ticket as soon as I get my passport back. And then I got a call to say, that show that you auditioned for, they want to see you do a chemistry read with the lead actor who's been cast already. You may have to go to London next week. I was like, oh, I don't have a passport. Shit. So I called the lovely Indian embassy in San Francisco. It wasn't even an embassy, it was some offshoot. And I was like, can I get my passport back? No, it's processing. I was like, no, you don't understand. I don't care if it's processing. I won't go to India anymore. I just need my passport back. No, we can't. I was like, what do you mean? Like, it's my passport. I may not have been the best version of myself during these phone conversations, but anyway, then the stars aligned and they decided there was some other actresses who were also on that side of the coast and somebody coming in from Australia, so it made more sense to do this chemistry read in California. But as that was happening, our friend Oliver...
Yeah, I've got to go off and do some of the events for this tour, and you and Donal had booked in to go to this spa, but obviously Katrina wasn't there, so Suzanne and I, after spending 3 weeks in India with our friend Donal, dropped him off like, you know, a kid on his first day of school, and it was rainy season, so there was no other tourists, and he was the only person at the spa, and some of the staff pretended to be other guests just to make him feel less awkward. And when we dropped him off, it was like a health spa, and we dropped him off, and he went to check in, and Suzanne was looking through the cupboards, and there was paper underpants.
I thought I wasn't sure if you were going to go there, but we are.
Oh, okay, all right,
we're going there.
Okay,
Go for it.
And Donal is getting a coffee enema, and his phone goes, and it's his other friend who's in costume, and she says, "I think Katrina got the part." And he says, "No,
I don't
no,
know about it.
He's like, "No, she didn't. Katrina, did you get the part?" No.
No, he calls me lying on a bathroom floor because he's just had this certain treatment and is waiting for it to up. And he calls me and he's like, "I think you just got the part." And I was like, "What are you talking about?" "No, nobody's called me. I don't know." And he was like, No, my friend's in costume and they want your sizes." And I was like, "No, nobody's called me. Stop doing this. I can't have had the part." And he was like, I need to get off the phone, but you've got the part.
But if it hadn't been for the Indian Embassy, you wouldn't have been able to do that chemistry read.
Exactly.
This is true.
When you talk about chemistry, that just fills me with fear, because you just sort of think you've got to go in and demonstrate some chemistry with this person. I mean, I just immediately would be hateful or something, just not be able to. How do you approach that?
Does it have to be actual chemistry, or is...
Yeah, like you can't think about it.
Yeah,
like
you just go in.
I may have been running late that day. I tend to not. No, I'm actually kind of punctual sometimes. You just gotta, yeah. I'm very blessed with a not. I think I'm very present to the point where I'm too present, as in the moment before and the moment after don't really exist. I'm sort of like, what's happening right now? Which sometimes works to my advantage. But I think with any of these things, I learned a very long time ago to park expectations. And it's a very hard thing to do, because we all want to imagine, okay, oh my God, if this happens, then this is going to happen, and then this is going to happen, and then it's going to be this. It's never going to be like that.
No piece of work I've ever made has turned out exactly the way I thought.
And sometimes you make a piece of work and sometimes somebody's father changes it completely.
Oh, yeah.
What happened there?
Donald's, I made this map for a documentary, and it was the British Isles, and it was painted on old wood, and I'd sort of done it with wet paint, and it was being sort of filmed as it was going, so there was all these drips.
Which were really cool.
Donald bought it, and his dad came over to visit, and Donald was having a lie-in, and his dad was like, "Oh, somebody spilled water on it, I can clean that up." It was untreated wood, and he took a scrubbing brush to it.
Literally scrubbed away parts of it.
And tell us, Oliver, how the dipped paintings came about, because that's an interesting story.
Honestly, I don't think we have time for that. That's like a half hour.
Have you got a shorthand? No.
It's about death.
Okay, can you describe what they are, your dipped paintings?
Dip paintings, I paint a portrait of somebody as realistically as I can, and then in front of a small audience I submerge it into a vat of paint. Nobody's allowed to film or record it in any way. They witness this disappear in front of their eyes, and then I interview them about what they remember seeing afterwards. And then I follow up a year later and interview them about what they remember seeing at that point.
I mean, I was very privileged to be at one of those, but it's also more than that. You take a testimony also of the...
It is. I mean, honestly, it's like this. I could talk for an hour about that.
It's fascinating.
That project.
But I think this is something that is amazing about Oliver's work, and the curiosity that you have about people, about life, about our existence, about what it means to be here. I mean,
it's all of that. It's about identity and memory and the fallibility of even your own memories and the stories you tell yourself. And it touches on all these things about the experience of loss, propelling forward into the unknown. And I was at a HarperCollins authors dinner, and the CEO of HarperCollins was like, "Oh, here's Oliver. This is a new author. Tell her about the dip paintings." And he walks off, and I was like, "Oh, fuck." And, it taps in deeply to. Is there such a thing as an objective truth? And I'm finding more and more often that no, there's not.
Mm. It's like you say, it's the stories we tell and the stories we are told.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And oftentimes, when you're telling, or you remember something, you're not actually remembering the original memory. You're remembering the last time you remembered it.
Yeah.
And so it changes.
It is so mutable. Mm-hmm. I mean, that's the thing. It's so. You know, as an actor, when you're trying to inhabit somebody and you sort of look for these clues as to who they are, it's such a trap to kind of think of events as facts.
Yeah.
Because no event is a fact.
I started reading into memory an awful lot, and it's a well-documented thing that happens when you ask people to describe their earliest memory. They often describe it from the location of a third party, because they're actually remembering a photograph.
Yeah. Yeah. I think we've all done that.
Yeah.
Listen, our time is almost up. Does anyone have a quick last question, just prompted by what we've been talking about? Yeah.
How do you get invited to one of your dipped paintings? I'll carry your bag.
Being in the right place at the right time.
It is an ongoing project, though, that isn't it?
It is, yeah. COVID definitely put paid to that. But actually, in good news, I'm talking to the Ulster Museum about gathering all of it, all the artefacts, everything. Like, for example, a painting, the size of the painting that you went to was, that size of the frame. You need 30 gallons of paint to fill a box so that will be submerged. We're going to do a retrospective and the last performance at the Ulster Museum, I think, in 2025.
Yay.
Okay. Excellent. Thank you so much. I mean, the Our Place in Space Festival has still got a little bit left to run. If you look at the website, you'll see all the things that are still on, and you can visit Oliver's amazing sculpture trail at Divis Mountain until the 10th. Then it goes away to Cambridge, doesn't it, and comes back to the Causeway Coast. Yeah, so there'll be another chance to walk around, and there's an app, and it's fabulous. But in the meantime, it's been wonderful to share this space and have Our Place here today with all of you. Please thank Oliver Jeffers and Katrina Bell.